My name is Taetro. I'm a music maker and a teacher. Today we're going to be learning about chords. What is a chord? How does it fit within the context of our song? And how do we actually play chords along with our song? At its most basic level, a chord is 3 or more notes coming together to create a single sound, a single harmony. Of course, we can create harmony with 2 notes, but in order for it to be called a chord, it must have at least 3 notes. These 3-note chords, the most basic versions of a chord, are called triads. 3 notes, triad. Today, we'll be playing 2 types of triads. We'll be playing major triads. Has a quite happy, triumphant sound. And we'll also be playing minor triads, which have a darker, more sad sound traditionally. All of these chords fit into a single key. Now, we are playing in the key of C major. If you've got your keyboard in front of you, you can play through the notes in C major very easily. They are all the white keys on your keyboard, except on my keyboard, they're black keys and the keys are inverted. Don't worry about that. But traditionally, these keys would be white. If you play through all of these notes, you have a C major scale. So if we're going to create chords, we can evenly space our fingers, say starting on C, skip a note to E, skip a note to G, and suddenly we have a chord. And if we want to play the next chord, all we have to do is just lift our hand, keep our finger positions, don't move the fingers at all, but lift our hand, move to the next note, and we have the next chord. And if you're curious, well, what makes a chord major or minor? It's actually pretty simple. A chord is major and minor based on the distance between the first note in the chord and what we call the third of the chord. We have the root of this chord, a C, then we have the second note in the chord, which we call the third, and then we have the top note, which we call the fifth. So we have the root, third, and the fifth. That's true for any chord that I play. If I jump down and play from G, and I play a triad on G, we still have a root, a third, and a fifth. What determines whether a chord is minor or major is the relationship between the root and the third. In C major, we can count all of the notes between C, the root, and E, the third. Let's count them. 1, 2, 3, 4. And each individual note that we just counted there, we can call those either half steps or semitones. Those are interchangeable concepts. If you're looking to warm up or if you need some inspiration, there are plenty of lessons and courses on chords in the Melodics app. So if a note is 4 semitones away from its root note, like C to E, that's going to create the sound of a major third. And then when we put the fifth on top, that gives us a C major triad. Let's start on D and play that triad again. D, F, A. We have our root, our third, and our fifth, but we're getting quite a bit of a dark sound. Well, let's examine the distance between our root and our third, just like we did earlier. How many semitones between? 1, 2, 3. 3 semitones between D and F, creating what we call a minor third, ultimately making this chord a minor chord. So naturally, if we stick to the rules of a key or a scale and we play triads going up those notes, if we just play one note at a time, we have the scale. If instead we play one triad at a time, going up the scale, we will ultimately have a collection of minor and major chords. And this chord, once we get to B, is a little special. Let's ignore it for now. But eventually we end up back at C, which is of course a C major chord, same as down here is C major. These are just different octaves, same notes. just different octaves. We're going to get into just playing these chords, and if you can get comfortable playing these chords and just have a little bit of that knowledge in the back of your head, the more we play, the more it will start to click. Take it slow if you need to. The biggest difficulty will be those leaps. Getting comfortable leaving your hand in the same position and jumping to other triads that aren't so close will be the biggest thing to practice. I'm going to use a different type of chord, something beyond just a normal triad. So a C major triad would be C, E, G. Now I've got my fingers evenly spaced there, as you can see. If I add a note on top, evenly spacing the notes even more, we have what's called a seventh chord. You probably recognize that sound. This makes for a pretty cool sound, rather than just the plain old simple triad. So we've got a seventh on top. Remember we talked about root, third, fifth. Well, there's another thing on top of that, seventh. And there's even more on top of that, but we'll leave it at that. So I think I'm going to start by playing a couple seventh chords. Just F to C. So let's record that loop really quick. I've got my loop brackets set up. I've got overdub record on. I'm going to hit record. We're going to record a simple 2-chord progression. I'm going to hold each chord for 4 beats. Now, if you notice, I wanted to hold each chord for 4 beats, like I said, but I had to get to the next note. One thing we can do with the MIDI here, in addition to like changing the timing of our MIDI, is we can stretch notes as well. So if we wanted to stretch that a little closer to the downbeat, we could certainly do that. I could also select all these notes and press legato, which will have them extend all the way until the next note starts. So I'm going to select all these chords, pressing legato, and they're going to extend for the full length. Something I'd like to point out too, now that we've got this initial chord progression, is that I can open up our browser and go to audio effects. This is a way we can change our sound. Why don't we try to add a chorus effect to this sound and hear what effect it has? I'll turn the dry wet up, the amount of the effect that's happening on this instrument. Switch to ensemble mode. I think my drums are a bit loud, so let me bring the drums down a bit so I can hear the chords better, rather than bringing the chords up. Got that little shakiness of a sound. How about if we added a little bit of reverb on top of this? Let's scroll down and find reverb. I'm just going to click and drag reverb into the audio effects. Great. Bringing up decay time. It's going to make that even bigger. Dry wet, like the intensity. We're not going to hear that clean electric piano anymore. We're going to hear all the reverb. You can play with dialing in dry wet. Notice how there's dry wet on both of these effects, and you'll find that on most effects. But 2 simple effects there that you can play with: chorus and reverb. And as you've probably noticed under audio effects, there's a lot more. Feel free to experiment, but just remember that if you do something you don't like, you can always click on it and delete it. I'm going to undo. I'm going to keep that chorus because I like how it sounds. All right. I like this sound for the initial section. Let's go ahead and just duplicate that. Command D. So now for the next section, we're going to keep that 2-chord chord progression. Very, very simple. I'm even going to go ahead and copy that. Command C. And paste right here at bar 13, which leaves us one gap to fill in bars 9 through 13. Let's figure out an alternative chord progression. Instead of playing the same chords again, let's find a new chord to start on. Let's start on A minor. Then go to E minor. And then go to the F. I think that'll work just fine. Let me turn on the metronome. We'll record that. Ready, go. Basically, you have all of the chords and the tones available to you in this given key. So try different chords in different orders and different rhythms and see where it takes you. So there we go. We essentially have our B section now, our proper B section with an alternative chord progression. I'm going to go in here. These notes were quite off. I'm just going to go ahead and quantize all of these. Command A to select all the notes. Command U, once again, to quantize them. And with all the notes selected, I can press legato and make sure all those notes are nice and long. So we've added effects, we've created 2 different chord progressions for our different sections, and I think that's going to work quite well for a basic chord progression. Like I said, experiment. You've got 7 notes in a scale. Each one of those notes of the scale can have a chord built off of it. And that's going to be it for today.